As Austin home prices continue to surge, a new study found our housing market is the second most overpriced in the nation.
How do you reach that conclusion?
So we simply use a history of prices to predict where should housing prices be today in Austin, and then we compare that to where they actually are. And that's how we come up with that 64, almost 65% premium at this point in time.
And so earlier this year, I shared that I believed 6% mortgage rates were accepted as the new normal. I think now we're in an environment where 7% mortgage rates are now the new normal.
Home buyers are staying on the sidelines as housing prices hit record levels and the number of new homes being built fails to keep up with demand. Home prices neared an all-time high in June, exceeding $400,000 for the third time on record. Lawmakers are joining the fight for affordable housing as they take notice of fierce competition in the housing market.
I think the key thing for us is really around rents a little more than home prices. I think the tick up in home prices is a little bit of a normalization in activity and a signal that we still need more homes, right? And that's part of what we're looking at. The key will be rents, and do rents really start to tick higher?
I represent the rent is too damn high party. Rent, it's too damn high. People are working 8 hours a day and 40 hours a week to some a third job. Once again, why? You said it, the rent is too damn high.
Good morning, Texas Realtors. Welcome to the Public Policy Forum today. We think we have a great program for you today. I'm Mario Arriaga, and I'm 2023 Chairman of the Public Policy Oversight Committee, and I'm happy to serve in that capacity this year. The 2023 Public Policy Oversight Committee is made up of 9 dedicated volunteer Realtor members, including Vice Chair Michael Langford, our liaison Dixon Holman, and the chairs and vice chairs of each of the subcommittees. The Oversight Committee, as a reminder, reviews and refines all the recommendations that come from those subcommittees for positions that Texas Realtors take on public policy matters that come before the state legislature. And we're honored to be your host for today's forum. We're also joined today by our incredible 2023 Texas Realtor Leadership Team, Chairman Marcus Phipps, Chair-elect Jeff Kahn, Secretary-Treasurer Christy Gessler, and redshirt Jennifer Wahab, and immediate past Chair Russell Berry, and of course our President and CEO Travis Kessler. Let's give them all another big round of applause. And now let's get to our program. Everyone in this room has stories to tell about the challenges we and our clients have faced in the high-cost housing markets of the past 3 years. The median sales price of a home in Texas in August of 2019 was $249,000, just under $122 a square foot. And it took an average of 54 days for a house to go on the market from listing to pending. Fast forward, July 2023, the median price of a home in Texas was $345,000, more than $177 per square foot. That's a 39% increase in 3 years. And this summer wasn't even the absolute peak of the recent housing market. Combine these prices with the current mortgage environment, where up until September 1, the Federal Reserve had posted 11 straight federal fund rate hikes. In mid-August, mortgage rates hit a 20-year high. And even though rates came down slightly recently, we're still hovering around 7%, a far cry from the good old days, even just 2 years ago, when they were closer to 3% interest. Texas has been fortunate historically to have lots of land and a nimble private sector that has kept our housing supply ample and thus affordable. But more than 1,000 people continue to move every day here into the state. And according to research by NAR, we've actually been quietly underbuilding for nearly 20 years, leaving us more than 500,000 housing units short. As realtors, we have seen it and we have felt it every day, working with clients who have struggled with a lack of homes for sale, to compete with other buyers, or to afford the loan it would take to buy the house if it can be found. So today we're going to dive into housing affordability, attainability, and sustainability, and how our state government can create or remove policies that will help us meet the needs of all of our current and future clients. So we're delighted today to have two guests with us who are going to tell us about their experiences in the housing policy field and teach us what they can do to help improve affordability and attainability for all Texans who want to own a home. So we have with us, seated here in this seat, we have Nicole Nosek. She is chair of the board for Texans for Reasonable Solutions. Prior to founding that housing-focused organization, she spent 14 years working in senior roles on campaigns at the federal, state, and local level. From co-campaign manager to communications director, Nicole grew passionate about housing affordability while she worked as a paralegal in San Francisco, making just below $50,000 per year. Now, living in San Francisco, $50,000 a year, where do you think you're going to have to live? Not on the street. But I'll tell you where Nicole lived. She could only afford housing by living with a family, including a baby and another roommate. She recognized the role limited housing supply had not only on those with lower incomes, but the middle class as well. This led her to work for an organization whose mission was to pass laws to encourage more housing development to accommodate the growing population and drive down cost through supply and demand approaches. She graduated from UC Berkeley with a BS in political science and a BA in rhetoric. She now resides in Austin, Texas, with her husband and 2 children. Let's welcome Nicole. Nathan Gorton is the Governmental Affairs Director for the Washington Realtors, where he has served for more than 13 years. He came to Washington Realtors from the Snohomish
County Camano.
County Camano, Snohomish County Camano Association of Realtors, where he spent 7 years as the local government affairs director and then took on the role of association executive. Prior to joining the Realtor family, Nathan worked on and managed several political campaigns ranging from city ballot issues to congressional races. Nathan has served as chair for the National Association of Realtors Government Affairs Directors and the president of Sidewalk, a local homelessness prevention group. And he also serves on the Political Oversight Committee of Enterprise Washington, the state's largest business PAC. Nathan, his wife Julia, and their 7-year-old daughter Eva live in Olympia, Washington. Let's welcome Nathan. So a little announcement. Hopefully we'll have some time for Q&A after the session, and you'll be able to text your questions. You should have a number that you'll be able to text it to. And I do need to tell you, though, messaging rates may apply. So our staff will send them to me up here on stage. If there's something that they can maybe answer directly, they will do that in the text to them. So now let's get started. Let me have a seat and have a little discussion with our illustrious guest here today. So let me get my notes ready. Thank you. Nicole, in your bio, you note that you were inspired to get involved in housing because of what you experienced living in the very high-cost San Francisco area. Can you tell us a little bit more about the policies in effect that you believe were a particular detriment to the housing market, and compare that to what you saw when you moved to Austin?
So I moved to San Francisco shortly after graduating college, and what I really noticed was that there was a few folks on city councils, and when you just listened to what they said and you didn't actually think critically about what they're saying, they sounded really good when they said don't build. My God, I almost volunteered for the guy who was kind of the spearheader of the anti-building movement, and really what I call anti-housing affordability movement. After digging into the policies, a part of me thought, how could a city that claims to care so deeply about its middle class and lower income, students, senior citizens, young professionals like I was at the time, have housing policies and a housing affordability crisis that ended up like this? In San Francisco, it's $1.2 million for a median home price. So we think Austin is bad. We think Texas is getting bad. You could just take a look at the trajectory that California, and specifically San Francisco, is going if we want to see just how bad it can get. And that's really kind of what our mission here is today. You asked about some of the similarities that I experienced in San Francisco and Austin. And what I could say is that when we moved to Austin, at the time that we moved, we were now financially secure. We started a family here in Texas. But when we moved, I looked around and I thought, woo, we're done with all of this anti-housing affordability groups. Texas has a more regulatory-friendly environment. It's going to be easier to build. And then I looked around in Austin. We moved here almost 5 years ago, and I thought, what the heck is going on? Am I in San Francisco or am I in Austin? And I actually joined a volunteer group there, and that volunteer group, they were powered up, they were very passionate, but at the time it was clear that the city council was not going to vote the way that would allow for housing affordability to come online, or missing middle housing. And so really what I saw in terms of the similarities in both San Francisco and Austin is that there's folks on the city council who make it sound like they're helping people, they're helping the middle class, they're helping lower income, they're helping minority groups by not allowing building to happen. And it's so clear that with supply and demand approaches, there's so much data out there that you're actually helping people by allowing townhomes to come online. Even if you're allowing the same big lots, which we actually advocated for allowing smaller lots than exist, more supply leads to lower demand, which lowers the prices. So I saw two of those same stories in both San Francisco and Austin, and we really look forward to turning that ship around in the legislative sessions to come, especially in partnership with the realtors.
So in observing those, both in San Francisco, here in Austin, how did that lead you to form your group, and who else is involved in your group?
Yeah, great question. So basically, I'd taken a look that, okay, the local city council, I don't have a lot of confidence that if I continue volunteering, this is going to be the best use of my time. What if we go to the state legislators and see if we can have some movement there, something that takes into account some level of the local flavor, while at the same time allowing the middle class, small businesses, young professionals, senior citizens to thrive in Texas. So that was what I thought was the best strategy that you'd seen replicated in other states across the United States, where there seems to be just a few groups. For example, City of Austin, there's about 30 plaintiffs that sued a policy called Affordability Unlocked. I mean, I don't know how you sleep with yourself, or you wake up in the morning with knowing that you sued somebody out, or you sued missing middle folks out of a house, or even low-income folks out of the house. So you asked what kind of folks are involved. It's been really fascinating, the diverse sort of makeup that we have at Texans for Reasonable Solutions. I mean, I even had dropped off my son at preschool somewhere that's in Greater Austin. And the teacher there approached me, because I guess my mom had mentioned to her what we were doing with our nonprofit, told me that she is a single mom, drives about 50 minutes every day back and forth, and has to live in an RV in her parents' yard. And this is Westlake Hills that my son goes to preschool. What kind of society are we living in if my son's preschool teacher has to drive 50 minutes back and forth and lives in an RV? And that seems so anti-American dream, so anti-Texas miracle. So she ended up joining our coalition. We've got University of Texas Austin students, many of which testified, some of which are interning with us. We've got senior citizen folks who, even though maybe they're fortunate enough to have a more expensive home in Austin, they're still advocating for their grandkids, for their kids, because they want their kids, when they grow up, to be able to live close to them. So we've got an interesting, diverse coalition, but more importantly, it's been really helpful, although realtors are not in our coalition, getting some of their bill advice and working alongside with them. I do wonder whether the bill that we passed, if we hadn't had some of the support from this coalition here, would have gotten through. So for that, we're super, super grateful.
Well, that's good to hear.
Yeah.
So Nathan, you know, you're Washington, Portland, Oregon, Seattle. I think your political environment is probably a lot closer to San Francisco than it is here in Texas. But tell us what it's really like. How has your legislature and municipal government historically addressed housing needs?
Yeah, so I think that Washington State is very blue on social issues, but can be a little purple on on tax issues. And, you know, kind of similar to what you were talking about in California, I think for a state that is blue on social issues, our cities have a lot of influence in the legislature. And so year after year, we would see good housing bills come up, and the cities would come in, oh, don't pass one size fits all, blah, 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 right? Like, no, local control. And it was really hard to break through some of those excuses. And so that was sort of the journey that we've been on. And I think we'll get into this a little bit later, but I think one of the things that we really tried to do pretty successfully this last session was lean into that blue environment a little bit. And I think the great thing about housing issues is it offers a really strong opportunity for unique coalition partners, right? So probably wouldn't work in Texas, but we joined with environmental groups. Because in Washington State, environmental groups are starting to understand, everybody's going to roll their eyes at this phrase, that housing policy is climate policy, right? We started working with social justice groups who are tired of seeing the families they represent year after year fall further behind while they see people who are homeowners not struggle as much. And so we formed sort of it took a little while, because these are groups that we would fight a lot with. Organized labor was around the table with us. And again, because they're workers, what is the number one thing that is challenging their workforce? Housing prices. So I think that the housing issue, not recommending that you all necessarily join forces with labor here in Texas. I'm not sure if that would work or not, but I do think that it allows for sort of a wide variety of unique coalition partners. And when we leaned into that, I think that's when we really saw some success.
Well, I think you, Washington Realtors, recently had some major success working with your state legislator to pass a package of bills to tackle the housing affordability. Tell us about that. You know, what policies did you focus on, and why did you choose those?
Yeah, so last year really was, we were really pushing the legislature to make it the year of housing, and I have to tell you, it absolutely was the year of housing. The Washington State Legislature passed more housing bills in the last session than they had the 20 years prior. right? So we passed somewhere around 14 housing bills dealing with the permitting process, dealing with, so this was really interesting. You had, so we have a process called SEPA, the State Environmental Protection Act, and you had realtors and environmental groups sitting next to each other talking about how SEPA is not necessary in some cases and is driving up the price of housing. Now, we've been saying that for 20 years, but finally the environmental groups, who again were looking at this through a climate lens, they finally saw the light, right? And so they helped us. So permitting process, we passed a bill that would allow duplexes and triplexes and single-family zoning. It was kind of tiered, so smaller cities can kind of handle it one way and larger cities can handle it another way, but they all have to handle it. We passed a bill that in our urban growth areas, so this won't help our rural folks, but in our urban growth areas, as long as you have sort of a traditional lot size, the local jurisdiction must allow up to 2 accessory dwelling units on every lot. So it was a huge, huge, huge year of housing. And I think for me, the best part was we had a conference kind of like this, and we had legislators come in to talk about the year of housing, and they all corrected me when I said, talk to me about this year of housing. They said, Nathan, this is the first year of housing. There's more work to do. So we started, we got the ball rolling, and I'm really excited to see what happens.
Well, that's great. Well, I hope, wishing you success in the oncoming years. Nicole, 2023 was the first legislative session that Texans for Reasonable Solutions was involved in. And you came out swinging on the issues of housing affordability, as I'm told. You supported a large package of bills and saw some success. How and why did you choose the issues you worked on this session?
Good question. First off, congrats. I mean, that's a lot of bills.
Thank you.
We really we probably had, I would say, 5 to 6 different meetings with everybody from a former city planner, a nonprofit group that was focused on affordable housing, an architect. We pulled in all of the folks who knew more than us, and the question was, what can we pass that, number one and most important, is going to move the needle in terms of housing affordability, but number 2 is winnable? Because sometimes we know there's bills that don't fall into both of these categories. We can dream or we can get stuff done, and sometimes they do on that Venn diagram. To that end, we got one bill passed, which was third-party review, which thanks to the realtors provided us with an endorsement, but that was something that we heavily focused on. Much like my colleague was saying here, there was data to show from a University of Texas at Austin study that every 3.5 months delay of getting your permits back adds up to 5% to the final price tag.
Interesting.
Now, when you consider this, and you consider the fact that City of Austin takes 1 to 2 years for site plan review, just do the math. It can add up to 25% to a home price just from stalling. And don't get me wrong, I don't think that the cities are necessarily mean-spirited. I think a lot of the times they're under-resourced. But what we were able to do was say, okay, if a city is going to take longer than 45 days after the initial submission of those site plan reviews, then the builder, the homeowner, has the opportunity to go to a qualified engineer or city inspector within Texas and get them to sort of respond to those site plan reviews. So it really was a way to help and potentially help with the release valve. Something else that we did was I made sure that we went ahead and we spoke with some of the major reasonable mayors in Texas, and privately a lot of these mayors agreed with us. And so it was really fascinating to me to see sometimes you had the lobbyists for the cities that were actively trying to kill a thing, but then you had we had city council members in cities going and lobbying for our legislation, while the city's lobbyist was going and trying to kill it. a very strange dichotomy. So that was the one that we ended up getting through. There was another bill that we really wanted to touch on some issues around what somebody could do with their own property. And that had to do with accessory dwelling units. You mentioned accessory dwelling units earlier. It ended up, we got it all the way through all of the different chambers, and it ended up dying 2 votes short. And it was always these misinformation campaigns where somebody said it had to do with short-term rentals, when we explicitly allocated powers to the city to determine whether these accessory dwelling units could be rented out or not. So that was, I call it the ADU bill heard across Texas. But of course, this is my obsession. So probably not as many people were paying attention to it as I was. I have a few others, but I'll just leave with my last one, which was my favorite, and actually sort of the fate of this bill idea has really been amazing. So it was minimum lot size reform. And just to give you a little bit of background on this, I believe that out of all of the bills that we introduced, that bill has the most far-reaching implications. And it wouldn't happen tomorrow, but it would happen over a decade. And we took this example from our backyard. City of Houston had implemented this in 1999. And what they found was over about 13 years, 75,000 units just came online organically, which was pretty impressive. But there was also another study in East Massachusetts which reduced their lot size, and it showed that supply increased by 40% over 10 years, but more importantly, even though prices usually increase over time, the prices decreased by 20%, but, and I hope I'm not boring you with details here, but the homeowner actually, per square foot, the property value went up. So it's truly a win-win-win here, because now people could buy smaller properties, but the square foot of the dollar amount of that square foot has gone up. So people have, a lot of folks, young professionals, senior citizens, now have access to smaller kinds of living. That minimum lot size bill got close, but it didn't make it across the finish line. And ultimately, City of Austin ended up passing a resolution saying we reduce our lot size from 5,750 square feet to 3,500 square feet, which was, 2,500 square feet, which was huge, and it was actually a lower square footage amount than what the bill ultimately said in the Texas state legislature. Now, City of Dallas is looking at this same thing. So it had an effect where it got a lot of the cities talking on two ends, and I'm happy to work with anybody who wants to make pro-housing reform. So we were working with the cities, we were working with the states, but it ended up having the effect where I think a lot of cities said, you know, they're probably going to bring this back next session. We should probably do this ourselves and have our version. And my answer was, yeah, do it. Like, we don't want to bring this back if you're going to get this done. So, yeah, that's probably my favorite bill here.
A question here just kind of popped up is, both of you can maybe address this, you know, how much is the issue of affordability impacted as a result of bad legislation or increased land, material, and labor costs?
Good question.
I mean, I would say probably in the last, since COVID, probably, we're talking a little bit more about material cost, in my view. But I also think, right, when you talk about land cost, right, you're looking at things like minimum lot size. You're looking at things, I'll talk a little bit later about one of our bills that would allow lot splitting, right? So there are ways that that the legislature can address land cost, allowing people to build a duplex in a single family zone, right? And by the way, duplexes are a great first-time homeowner product, right? Because they can live in one half of the duplex and they can rent out the other half of the duplex. And so certainly, I think all of that matters. I do think, though, there are things all legislators can do to address things like land cost. Lumber cost, labor cost, a little harder, I think, for a state legislature to get their hands around.
Okay.
Yeah, if you don't mind, I'm going to bring up a few studies that kind of touch on this. So there was a study that showed that when you compare it to Houston has a very regulatory friendly approach towards building houses. When you compare any given house that's built in Austin versus Houston, there's about $100,000 discrepancy. Same house, same lot size, same materials. So that in and of itself might give you a good idea of the cost of regulations, especially when you consider the averages of each area. What I'll also point to is in Manhattan, they did a study where they showed for every $1 spent on construction, there was $2 that was spent on regulatory fees, whether it was attorneys or regulations. So that's significant when you take a look at just the cost of construction versus the amount of sort of onerous regulations, which yes, we do need regulations, we do need to be safe, but at what point are we just piling on things that could be streamlined and safe? And that's the biggest question here. So.
Those are great points. So you both understand that to be successful in the legislative sessions, it won't happen without bipartisan engagement and support. So share with us how you go about obtaining that. How do you get that when you opposite ends of the spectrum and yet you're trying to come together on a goal that you want to accomplish? Nicole?
Yeah, I will, I'm happy to go first, but I gotta say, my colleague here probably knows a little bit more since he got a few more bills passed. We did end up engaging Democrats. I think that this is something that we should have gone deeper on. I think that we underestimated how much Democrats understood the issue of how supply and demand and how regulations affect housing affordability, and that was a mistake. So we should have engaged more on that side of things. But what I'll say is that there was a senator who I was told repeatedly, this senator is not going to vote your way. They are adamantly against building homes. Anything where developers make money, they are a no on. So I thought, they're having a coffee. This senator was having a coffee soon, and I had about 3 University of Texas students show up to that coffee. I had another small business owner show up to that coffee. I showed up to that coffee. We had somebody from an environmental org show up to that coffee. And we all asked questions to her about what she plans on doing about workforce housing. And afterwards, I approached her and I said, hey, I'm just curious if you're aware where this concept of sort of the regulatory housing regime that we see now, where it came from. Because there's a lot of data out there that shows in the 1920s, there was a guy named Edward Bassett who set up all of these systems as a roundabout way for segregation. And this was a way, literally in code in New York, it talks about how they created commercial properties because they didn't want, and I quote, Jewish factory workers to be able to mingle with the upper class shoppers on Fifth Avenue. And then there was another in a code in Berkeley, it also talked about how they didn't want the Chinese laundromat owners to be with the homeowners in Piedmont. So when I said this, her eyes opened, and subsequently she voted for 2 of the 3 major housing bills that we had our eyes focused on. And it was really an aha moment of, okay, if we just show her that her people are behind this, and we give her the facts, it can change perspective here. So that was a great experience.
That's a great success story right there.
Yeah.
That's a great one. Nathan?
Yeah, and you know, first of all, I do want to say it took me 13 years to pass those bills. So you know, so you're just starting that journey.
Right?
So
start somewhere.
I think for us being willing to talk about housing in a different way, and you know, we all in this room believe that housing is the American dream, and I absolutely believe that. I also wonder if legislators' eyes glaze over when you talk about it like that. And they've heard that a million times, so approaching it in a different way, being able to tell them real stories about their communities, being willing in Washington to talk about housing through a social justice lens, which is not something that I'm super comfortable with, but is something that we've engaged a little bit on. And just being willing to change up how you talk about housing, I think, and being willing to have new ideas and new partners, I think it is really important.
So have you seen, and maybe our audience here is, you know, you mentioned affordable housing. and it brings to mind different things for many different people. I would imagine it brings different things to mind from the politicians. How do you get over maybe a knee-jerk reaction to that, to move past, to come up with some really good solutions? Nicole, you want to start with that?
Yeah, it's interesting because affordable housing polls poorly amongst both Democrats and Republicans. And what's fascinating is housing is not like a clear Democrat or clear Republican issue. And we've really seen this in the past couple of years. I was actually talking on a podcast with somebody that warned me, this person is anti-housing policies. It might be smart for you not to go. And on that podcast, I think it's important to build opt-outs, at least at the beginning of stages, not when you're at the point where you're passing like 13 housing bills, but to build opt-outs so that those enclaves that want their 1-acre lots, they can opt out of the minimum lot size reform within their own communities. And I really noticed when I was talking to this podcast host, who clearly did not, prior to that podcast, like this, he relaxed when he heard about the opportunity that he could create a deed restriction that would make it so his house wouldn't be subdivided. But more importantly, it was the homeowner association, which I know some folks, when you say homeowner association, they roll their eyes. But it's just the concept of an opt-out of, look, if you want your immediate community to be able to have large lots or to be able to have that 5,000 square foot lot, you can do that, but just don't impose an entire country club situation on the entire city. If you take a look at City of Austin, over 70% of AISD employees don't live in the City of Austin. I spoke with the priest that we're friends with, and he told me for the Catholic school that he runs, about 60 of the people who work there, there's only 2 people who live within the City of Austin. So all of these, something's got to give, but letting people have their own enclave, I think, has been really helpful towards convincing legislators so they could go back to their districts and the enclaves where it's important to them that it remains the same and say, look, you can keep yours. We just want to free it up for the areas where those folks, it's not as meaningful that they don't have a duplex in their property.
Nathan?
Well, so in Washington State, affordable housing really means subsidized housing, right? And that's
part of the initial reaction.
That's right. And so I think one of the things that we've done over the last few years, I think my legislative committee, anytime the words affordable housing or subsidized housing or a bill around it was brought to them, there might have been some eyes rolling around the table a little bit. And one of the things that we really spent a lot of time talking about is there's no one answer for the housing problem. And the fact of the matter is subsidized housing is an important piece of the answer. It's a small piece, and you can't subsidize your way out of the problem, and we're really clear on that. But there are families who are going to need help. And so could we consider not having such a hard line in the sand on some subsidized housing bills? And can we work with some of these groups on their bills and use that opportunity to explain the housing ladder? And to say, by the way, the reason you want to support all of these bills is you want to move people out of these non-subsidized apartments so then your clients can get into those apartments so then you can help the next family down the street. Now, we drew a really hard line in one area. Last year, this session actually, it's too bad. We had like all these housing victories, and in the last 6 days of session, a number of progressive legislators decided to try to push through an increase in our transfer tax to pay for subsidized housing. So we're going to make all housing more expensive to pay for affordable housing, right? It gives me an aneurysm just thinking about it. But we were able to go and we were able to defeat that bill because we were able to point to all of the other solutions that we had supported. And I think that's really important in a legislature where, the people do get frustrated with groups just being no. And so we had to take another look at how we were dealing with subsidized housing. And I think we've really benefited from that.
Great. Well, and as you well know, we're very fortunate here in the state of Texas due to the work of all of our governmental affairs and our realtor members. We don't have a transfer tax in Texas.
Yeah. I know, I've heard that.
So, Nathan, you and the Washington Realtors formed really a fascinating coalition that involved some organizations that not typically thought of in the housing policy area, like Amazon.
Yeah.
So how did that partnership come to be, and has it been successful?
Yeah, no, it's really interesting. So, Amazon, company that was founded in Washington State and has been, fairly successful, I think. They really are starting to care about housing policy because they understand that for some of their workers, housing isn't an issue, but, right, I mean, Amazon needs warehouses, lots and lots and lots of warehouses and lots of people to work in those warehouses. And for a lot of the people who work in those warehouses, housing prices, it is an issue, right? And it's hard to recruit, it's hard to retain employees. And so they become really involved. It also helped that a gentleman named Guy Palumbo, he's former state senator in Washington State, and he is, in the best sense of the word, a true housing nerd. He was a planning commissioner, and he loves to nerd out on sort of housing policy and housing ideas. And he was one of the first 50 employees of Amazon, and then he kind of cashed out and went and ran for the legislature, and then they pulled him back in to be the national housing policy coordinator for Amazon. So that was a pre-existing relationship that I had, and Guy is super energetic. He's a New Yorker, and you know it the minute you meet him. And so when we started talking about this, and we put together a pretty big campaign. It's about a $1.2 million campaign, in a lot of TV ads and digital ads and things like that, talking about housing policy and our solutions. He got Amazon to write a $300,000 check for the campaign. And the really interesting thing was when I went to NAR to ask them for money, I think their number one question was, is Amazon thinking about getting into real estate brokerage services? They were a little skeptical, but I asked Guy Palumbo, and he said, to my knowledge, we are not. And so Amazon is very interested in working, especially in, there's about 10 states on their list that they really want to get involved in housing policy on, and Texas is on that list. In fact, we almost had Guy here today, but he had to do something with some old Nirvana people. So anyways.
Well, that's great. That's great. And Nicole, you've kind of touched on it a little bit already, but want to expand a little bit on the groups that you've gotten involved with you and how they've helped you in this process?
Yeah, so I think it's been shocking to see the diverse coalition that we put together, to the point where we followed up for that ADU vote heard across Texas, which may have just been heard or paid attention by me. And in that one, I showed a representative the list of endorsements, and we had Texas Public Policy Foundation really went to bat, because this is such a clear property rights, free market solution. Why is the government telling me what to do in my backyard? We had Habitat for Humanity, who, even though they have their own interests for their constituency, I was really impressed how they really took it a step further, and they're looking out for sort of the Texan middle class that's even outside of their own constituency. And I think that was really, really impressive. And we also had folks like Appleseed, but there were a lot of folks who, they were kind of looking at the other like, are we in the right room together? We're not used to being on the same side here. But when I showed one of the representatives, she looks at the sheet and she goes, what the heck? This is schizophrenic. I don't understand it. All the different organizations on there. But I think it really did help to pull all those different constituencies to go in and talk to different legislators. And I think next session, we plan on leaning on them more. I don't want to forget the Association of Builders was super helpful, especially with our bill language. And the realtors, when we went into probably arguably one of the most powerful offices in Texas, one of the first questions that they asked me was, how does the realtors feel about this? And I was like, yes, we're talking to the realtors. That was before the realtors had given us their endorsement, but having a broad coalition was helpful, and we plan on resting on that and building it out even more next session.
Well, we're glad that we've been some assistance in that regard.
Yeah,
absolutely. So, you know, when we
Can I just interrupt, though, because I also want to highlight Habitat for Humanity, and they're a great group to work with. They put a different face on housing. We've worked with them a lot. We agree with them on about 90% of the stuff, and we'll look the other way on the other 10. And so I agree with you that they're a great partner.
Great. You know, y'all mentioned it both before in terms of lowering minimum lot size or by right accessory dwelling units. You know, we're talking about things that are typically under the jurisdiction, as you stated, of the local entities. You know, at least in Texas, it may be different where you are, Nathan. So a justified argument for local control has been one size may not fit all. So how can we strike that balance between what the local housing policy is and what the statewide priorities might be?
Yeah, I really think, I mean, it depends on which legislator you're talking to, but I would say when you're talking to folks that lean a little bit right, the most local control is being able to determine what you're doing with your own backyard. And that really rings home, especially in Texas, where property rights is so fundamental. And if property rights is American, it's even more Texan. So that really resonated. I would also say that you take a look at City of Austin has been trying to pass comprehensive housing reform for years now. And there's just about 20 or 30 folks that are suing to sort of stop these changes from happening. So what you've seen is a situation where it doesn't feel democratic anymore, and it doesn't feel like the will of the local people is really being implemented. Yeah, I think that's really key here.
Nathan, I know it's different there. But
It is. So, okay, my view is cities are the problem.
Really?
100%, cities are the problem. And
too many ordinances, too many requirements.
Yeah, they don't want to do anything, and you know, and I get it. City council members have tough jobs. They get yelled at in the grocery store all the time, and you know, nobody wants new housing. And you know, when I was local GAD, I would sit through these 6-hour-long city council meetings where people would get up and say, you know, I support the Growth Management Act, but don't build this housing development next to me, right? And the talk about sprawl, right? And of course, the definition of sprawl is any house that's newer than yours.
I've not heard that one before.
Yeah.
Right, and so cities are the problem. And so one of the things we talked a lot about is, where has this local control gotten us? Cities have had local control for 40 years. If they wanted to help on the problem, they would have done it by now. And they're the problem. And this session, the legislature absolutely decided to roll the cities.
Okay.
The other thing that we did, using some data, and I think trying, there's probably been roughly, 3 million white papers written on housing. And so one of the things we tried to do was, let's look for some really good nuggets that we can use again and again and again. So an economist group did some work actually for our lieutenant governor, and they found that Washington State was 50th in the country, last place in the number of housing units per family.
Wow.
What?
50th place in the number of housing units per family. That's ownership, rental, the whole thing. What do you think that does to housing prices? So even the sort of most cynical legislator can understand that's a problem. And so every time I testified, and the first bill I testified in the legislature this year, I said, I am going to use this stat every time I'm in front of you this year. So get ready, right? And we pounded them over the head with that stat. So finding something like that they can't run away from, I think is important.
I was looking at the time here, and we're going to be running out of time shortly, so I'm going to kind of skip to a couple of other questions here. Many affordable programs such as down payment assistance or low interest loans are set up to serve borrowers with a certain annual median income. often around 30 to 60 or 80% of the median income. But that range leaves out the lowest income end, really, and a lot of the middle class. So how do we ensure the programs and initiatives we implement help future homeowners across the economic spectrum who would otherwise not be eligible for these special programs? Nicole, you want to?
Yeah, I mean, I hope I don't sound redundant here, but I actually wrote a paper with Kevin Erdman, who is a former Mercatus researcher. I think the answer goes back to filtering. And he actually did an in-depth study of Los Angeles, saw that when houses weren't being built, it was the lowest income who were the first to leave. And when you build more housing, put aside sort of the subsidies, MFI, which yes, I think that is a good thing, but I am focused on getting more houses built, because what you see, and I experienced this firsthand in San Francisco, you had tech workers making 300, 400K who were living in naturally occurring affordable housing. Those are apartments that in any other city probably should have been an apartment for somebody making 30 to 40% MFI. Well, now that tech worker is moving into that apartment, renovating it, and that's their new home. And what about that person who actually would be making that 30%, 40% MFI? Well, they're having to drive out an hour, hour and a half every day. So I think the answer here really is supply and demand. And sure, subsidized housing is good, but it really functions as a lottery system. So yes, those people who get it, they're lucky, and I'm happy that they're getting it, but we need to be doing that and more. And that's where supply and demand, building more housing, especially of smaller lot sizes, different variations, accessory dwelling units, comes into play.
Any comment to that?
Yeah, and I guess I would just agree. I mean, I think the number one thing that the legislature can control is land cost, and they can do that by passing bills that do things like allow people to build duplexes, allow people to build ADUs. We had a bill, you can also incentivize. We had a bill that passed this year that would give homeowners a break on their property taxes if they rented out their ADU to people under 50% of AMI. So you can do incentive programs, right? Just like the overall housing issue, I think it's a lot of little things. Land trusts, I think land trusts are a really unique way to get at some of that land cost. So again, I wish there was a silver bullet, and I wish I could be up here and say, just do this one thing and then we're all gonna be fine. I haven't found it yet, but I'm not done looking.
Okay. One more question for each of you, and then we'll see if we have some time for some of the questions from the audience today. Nicole, as we mentioned in the beginning, the Texans for Reasonable Solutions came in with a big agenda for your first legislative session. As we head towards the next one, hopefully not till 2025, okay, what is the number one item you'd like to get accomplished?
I'm currently researching and going deep on how we address these solutions from a very comprehensive perspective. And there's been some legwork that has been done. In Texas in the 1960s, there was a comprehensive planning act that was passed at the state legislature. It said, okay, everybody, each city needs to put together their comprehensive land plans, and there needs to be zoning such that it comports with that, meaning the zoning should allow, if you plan on having more apartments, if you plan on having smaller lots, if you plan on having duplexes, they should be married together. That hasn't been the case. And so the question that I've been exploring with professors and stakeholders has been, how do we make that a reality and not something that simply just sounds good, but that actually might have some teeth on it?
And what are your plans for the next session?
So I think,
well, let me ask you this.
Yeah.
What can you share with us, suggest to us that would help us in our next legislative session?
Well, so, and I work very closely with your fantastic government affairs staff. And so, and sometimes they like drag me to the bar late at night and keep me out much later than
nobody does that
Absolutely.
here. No,
that might have happened last night. Anyways, and so we communicate, and I'm happy to get all of our bill language and everything. I guess it's hard for me to say, not exactly knowing the sort of regulatory environment. I'm not sure that I can say this one thing would translate best, but I mean, certainly our accessory dwelling unit bill, I think that will make an immediate impact in Washington state. I think that the bill we passed that allows missing middle housing in single family zones, that will make that'll make impact over the next 30 years. The ADU bill will make an impact over the next 5 years. And then the last bill that I'll mention is a bill that I'm excited about that'll be our #1 priority next year, and that's allowing lot splitting, because it's the only bill that will allow new buildable lots overnight. And what that bill says is, if a homeowner has a lot of, I think it's at least 3,000 square feet, with very minimal work, they can split the lot and have a new buildable lot, as long as one of the lots, I think, has to be 60% of the original lot size. And so, yeah, it's a smaller lot, but again, talking about land costs, talking about opportunities for your kids to live around you, talking about opportunities to age in place, right? All of these things are really important, and I think lot splitting is something that can really help us take the next step in Washington state. And so that's kind of the big thing for next session.
Okay. Well, I see that we're out of time, so we're not going to be able to take any of the text questions. But before we leave, I want to leave on a little lighter note. So, you know the saying, everything is bigger in Texas, right? You've heard of that before.
I've heard that. I have.
So, including football. So, last night, first football game, Detroit beat Kansas City. It was a big upset. So, who do you pick to win the Super Bowl this year? Nicole?
I'm going to say A&M, because they have great. They have,
you know what? They're
great,
strong enough. They might be able to do that.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. I don't know the first thing about football.
Oh, that's okay.
Don't hold that against me.
That was a good response. There's a lot of people here that are giggling for that. Okay, exactly. So.
I mean, you guys aren't going to like my answer. Don't sleep on my Seahawks. 2 loaded draft classes in a row. I think maybe next year is a better window for them, but don't sleep on those Seahawks. And we'll be playing the Cowboys a little bit later this year.
I got
so
you.
We'll be beating the Cowboys a little bit later.
Well,
so.
Thank all of you to our audience for being here today. We hope you leave with a better grasp of how to talk to anyone and everyone about the importance of these policies that will support our housing demand. So please join me in thanking our guests, Nathan and Nicole.